I had always been the kind of person who believed in quiet loyalty, in showing up even when it wasn't convenient, and in giving people the benefit of the doubt. I'd grown up thinking that respect and hard work would naturally be recognized, that honesty and patience were virtues that would eventually pay off. So when I started at the marketing firm 3 years ago, I poured myself into it, often staying late, double-checking campaigns, and covering for colleagues who couldn't meet deadlines. My dedication wasn't flashy. It was silent, but I thought it mattered. I thought it was enough. That Thursday morning, the office hummed with its usual low buzz. I sat at my desk, my heart thumping in a way I hadn't felt in weeks. Today wasn't just another day. Today, I was going to ask for something I had been quietly working toward, a raise. Not a small one, but one that reflected years of contribution, of sacrifices, of never cutting corners even when no one was watching. I'd rehearsed my words, kept them calm, professional, and grounded in facts. I believed that honesty and clarity would make the request reasonable, maybe even appreciated. When I knocked on his office door, my hands were surprisingly steady. "Do you have a moment?" I asked. He looked up from his laptop, the kind of smile that usually meant everything was under control, or at least he wanted me to think so. "Of course, come in," he said. I explained myself carefully, highlighting completed projects, campaign successes, and the value I had quietly added. I spoke without hesitation, without pleading. I tried to measure my words with calm professionalism, trusting that years of proven work would speak for themselves. Then he smiled. It wasn't a smile of understanding or encouragement or even polite amusement. It was the kind of smile that hits you in your chest because you realize the person across from you doesn't see you, hasn't been listening, and perhaps never will. I waited for words of acknowledgement, for a pause that might signal thought, for a hint of respect, but the pause never came. Instead, he chuckled softly and leaned back in his chair. "A raise," he said, his tone light, almost playful. "After all this time, you really think that's reasonable?" Something inside me froze. I felt it start as a small twinge in my stomach, but it spread quickly, a cold awareness that my quiet dedication had been invisible to him. That all those late nights, all the extra effort, all the ways I had carried work silently to ensure nothing fell through the cracks, they hadn't earned even a fraction of recognition. They hadn't earned respect. I swallowed, trying to keep my voice steady. "I think it's fair," I said. "And I've been hoping we could discuss it seriously." He smiled again, a cruel, gentle sort of smile, like he was humoring a child who had misplaced their sense of reality. "You've done fine work," he said, "but you know the company has budgets, limitations, maybe another time." The words barely touched the surface of what I felt. I nodded slowly, as if the conversation were ordinary, though inside I was unraveling. I could feel every ounce of patience I had cultivated over 3 years cracking, but outwardly I remained calm. I couldn't allow my emotions to betray me yet. I had to leave with dignity, even if my heart was breaking quietly. After a moment, I thanked him, turned, and walked out of his office. The hallway felt unusually long, the fluorescent lights too bright. My hands were trembling slightly, but my mind had already begun plotting the next steps. Years of loyalty didn't guarantee respect. Years of silence and hard work didn't earn fairness. And maybe, just maybe, it was time for me to stop believing that they would. That night, as I sat at my kitchen table staring at the faint hum of the city outside my window, I felt a strange clarity wash over me. For the first time, I realized that self-respect could not wait. It wasn't about retaliation. It wasn't about proving him wrong. It was about honoring my own worth, something that no smile, no chuckle, and certainly no delayed recognition could ever diminish. By the next morning, my decision would change everything, not with anger, but with quiet, undeniable certainty. The next morning, I woke before my alarm. The sunlight spilling across my bedroom floor felt sharper somehow, as if it had noticed the shift inside me. I could still hear his laugh in my mind, the soft, almost casual sound that had reduced years of dedication to a trivial joke. It wasn't loud or mean, but it carried a quiet cruelty, the kind that doesn't need to yell to hurt. I walked into the office, keeping my head down, my expression calm. The day moved slowly, with emails and meetings blending into one another, but my mind was elsewhere. Every corner of the office seemed different now. Every smile from a colleague felt faint, distant. I realized with a quiet ache that the trust I had held in that place had been fragile all along, and that a single laugh could break it. I tried to focus on my work, pulling reports, reviewing campaigns, and responding to clients, but the laughter echoed with every keystroke. How many other times had I been dismissed? How many quiet contributions had been ignored while others received praise for what they hadn't done? Questions I had never asked before now pressed against me relentlessly, and with each one, I felt a tiny thread inside me snapping. By lunchtime, I noticed the subtle ways he treated me differently. Not openly hostile, he was too smooth for that, but distant. The polite nods felt like obligations rather than recognition. The small conversations about projects were clipped, sterile. I realized with a sinking clarity that my presence there had never been valued for my skills, but only tolerated, convenient when needed. The betrayal wasn't loud or obvious. It was insidious, quiet, and impossible to ignore once I saw it. That evening, I stayed late, pretending to check final numbers while my mind churned. I remembered how I had once stayed after hours to help him finish a client presentation, how I had covered deadlines for other departments, how I had quietly protected the reputation of the company, even when no one noticed, and now, after all that, a single laugh had been enough to dismiss me entirely. I packed my things slowly. Each item felt heavier than the last, not because of its weight, but because of the weight of realization. For 3 years, I had trusted the wrong person with my loyalty. I had assumed that work ethic, honesty, and patience were enough to earn fairness. And now I understood that my trust had been mistaken, that my gentleness had been mistaken for weakness. Yet amid the hurt, a strange clarity emerged. Betrayal is cruel, but it also teaches. It forces you to look at yourself honestly, to see the cracks that others have ignored, and to discover the strength you didn't know you possessed. I felt a quiet determination stirring, a resolve that didn't come from anger, but from self-respect. I would not let someone else define my worth. I would not wait for validation that would never arrive. By the time I left the office that night, I was calm, almost eerily so. The betrayal still stung, but I could feel it transforming into something quieter, sharper, and stronger. It was no longer raw pain, it was understanding. I had been seen, dismissed, and laughed at. But I had also learned something far more valuable. I could choose what I would accept, and I could act on it without losing my dignity. That night, I went home and sat at my desk. I opened a blank document and began writing a resignation letter, not with rage, not with threats, not with humiliation, but with clarity, calmness, and honesty. I described my contributions, my value, and my decision to step away. I thanked the company for the experience, but I left no room for negotiation or compromise. It was quiet, simple, and unshakable. I read it over once, twice, and then saved it. My hands didn't shake. My heart didn't pound. I felt free. And in that freedom, I realized something I had never known before. Sometimes the most powerful response is not to fight, but to walk away with quiet certainty, letting your absence speak louder than words ever could, The next morning, I arrived at the office with a quiet determination that surprised even me. The resignation letter was ready in my inbox, carefully addressed to my boss and HR, typed in simple, measured language that reflected everything I had learned in the past 24 hours. I didn't need to justify my decision, to plead, or to explain. I had learned the power of silence, and today I would let it speak for me. When I opened my boss's office door, he looked up with his usual easy smile, but this time it didn't reach his eyes. He had no idea what was coming. I handed him the letter without a word. He glanced at it, then back at me, his expression shifting from casual amusement to confusion, and then surprise. "Is this?" he started, his voice uncertain. I shook my head slightly, keeping my expression calm. "It's my decision," I said softly. That was all. No anger, no resentment, no dramatic flourish, just truth. He swallowed, searching for words, but none came. I could feel the shift immediately, the subtle tension that had never been there before. He had never seen me like this, composed, unwavering, unshakable. All the polite nods and smiles he had assumed meant compliance now seemed to crumble under the weight of my quiet certainty. Walking back to my desk, I noticed the way the office felt different. Colleagues who had once ignored me or taken my contributions for granted now looked at me with curiosity, perhaps even respect. I didn't smile or acknowledge them. I didn't need to. I had nothing to prove. I had finally aligned my actions with my values. By mid-morning, the office was buzzing with whispers. HR had seen the letter and informed my boss. He called me back to his office, his tone suddenly urgent, almost pleading. "Wait," he said, trying to maintain composure. "Let's talk about this. Surely we can find a compromise." I looked at him quietly, measuring my words. "There's nothing to discuss," I said. "I've been patient for years. I've been loyal. I've contributed my best, and I realized that my work here is not valued the way it should be. I need to move on." His expression faltered, then hardened slightly. I realized that he had never considered the possibility that I could leave without begging or bargaining. That's when it struck me, the power of self-respect. By remaining calm, dignified, and decisive, I had taken control of the narrative, and there was nothing he could do to manipulate it. Later that afternoon, I packed the remainder of my things. Every step felt lighter than the last. I thought of the years I had invested, the long hours, the quiet sacrifices. And I realized that none of it had been wasted. Each challenge, each moment of patience, each act of quiet dedication had shaped me, preparing me for this very moment, when I could leave not with anger, but with confidence and clarity. As I walked out of the office for the last time, I felt an unusual calm settle over me. The betrayal still stung, but it no longer controlled me. I had discovered something far more important than recognition or approval. I had discovered my own strength, my own value, and the quiet dignity of making choices that honored myself. By evening, news of my resignation had spread. Colleagues whispered, some in awe, some in disbelief. And somewhere deep inside, I felt a quiet satisfaction not from proving him wrong, not from seeing him unsettled, but from knowing that I had acted with integrity and respect for myself. That night, as I sat in my apartment with a cup of tea, I realized the full extent of what had changed. I had been hurt, yes. I had been dismissed, yes. But in leaving, I had reclaimed something that no one could take from me, my self-respect, my voice, and my emotional freedom. And for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. The morning after my last day at the office, I woke up with an unusual calm. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the weight of other people's expectations pressing down on me. I didn't feel the ache of being unseen or undervalued. The silence of my apartment was comforting, almost luxurious, like a space finally created entirely for me. My thoughts, my choices, my life. By late morning, my phone rang. It was my former boss. His voice carried that unfamiliar edge of hesitation, tinged with urgency. "Can we talk?" he asked. For a moment, I almost felt a flicker of doubt. Was there some unresolved issue I had overlooked? But I shook my head. I had learned over the past 2 days that no one else gets to define my worth. I agreed to meet him at a nearby cafe. I didn't rush. I walked calmly, each step deliberate, aware of the power of my presence without needing to wield it aggressively. When I arrived, he was already there, sitting with an uneasy posture, sipping a coffee that had gone cold. He looked up, and for the first time, I saw him differently, not the person who had laughed at my request, but a man suddenly aware of what he had lost. I didn't realize," he began, fumbling, "how much you've contributed. We should have recognized it sooner." I listened quietly, my expression neutral. Inside, I felt no rush to react, no urge to demand apology or acknowledgement. I had come here not to argue, not to reclaim validation that wasn't mine to retrieve, but simply to exist in my own truth. "I appreciate that," I said softly, "but what matters now isn't recognition. It's understanding my boundaries and knowing my own value. I've spent too many years hoping someone else would give it to me. I've learned that I can give it to myself." He swallowed, and for a long moment we simply sat there. No dramatic speeches, no loud declarations, no desperate attempts at persuasion. The silence itself carried the weight of realization, the quiet sting of regret, and the undeniable truth that some opportunities once lost cannot simply be reclaimed. Then he nodded, a small, respectful gesture. "I understand," he said. I hope you find a place where your work is truly valued." I smiled faintly, a gentle, inward smile that held no bitterness. "I already have," I replied, and it was true. The office, the approval, the years of silent labor, none of it defined me anymore. What mattered was the clarity, the strength, and the dignity I had found by choosing myself. Over the next few days, I focused on my own path. I updated my resume, reached out to new opportunities, and allowed myself to dream, not cautiously, not for validation, but freely, guided by my own standards. Each email sent, each phone call made, reinforced a quiet truth. I could create value, earn respect, and live fully without begging for acknowledgement. And the best part, the lesson stayed with me not as a painful memory, but as quiet empowerment. I realized that the betrayal, the laughter, the dismissal, it had all been a gift in disguise. It had forced me to confront my own strength, to claim my self-respect, and to walk away before compromise became resignation of my dignity. Weeks later, I learned that my former boss had indeed tried to persuade others to convince me to return. But I had no interest. The peace I had found, the freedom of choosing myself, was priceless, and nothing he could offer could match it. I understood finally that the most profound victories are not shouted or flaunted. They are quiet, lived in the moments where we honor ourselves, set boundaries, and walk forward with confidence. No applause is needed. No revenge is necessary. The only witness that matters is the person in the mirror. And for the first time in years, I liked the reflection I saw. I had been laughed at, dismissed, and undervalued, but I had left with something far greater: serenity, dignity, and a life guided by my own strength. And in that quiet, calm certainty, I knew one simple truth. Peace is what I didn't negotiate away.